7 teenagers walked into their prom on May 15th, 1992. None of them ever made it home. For 32 years, their disappearance remained one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Until March 2024, when construction workers renovating a police station made a discovery so shocking, so unthinkable, that it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about that night. What they found hidden in the basement wasn't just evidence, it was proof of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of law enforcement in Millbrook, Ohio. But before I tell you about that earth-shattering discovery, you need to understand exactly what happened on Prom Night 1992 and why the truth stayed buried for over 3 decades. If you're new here, I investigate cold cases and unsolved mysteries. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, because this story is unlike anything I've ever covered. And trust me, what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you think you know about missing persons cases. Let me take you back to Millbrook, Ohio, May 15, 1992, a town of 15,000 people, where everyone knew everyone else's business, where doors were rarely locked, and where the biggest crime was usually underage drinking at the old quarry. It was the kind of place where 7 teenagers could grow up feeling safe, loved, and completely invincible. The 7 students at the center of this mystery weren't just random classmates, they were the cream of Millbrook High School's graduating class, each one destined for greatness, each one carrying dreams that seemed within reach, and each one about to vanish without a trace in the most unimaginable way possible. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let me know in the comments what you think happened to these 7 teenagers. Do you believe they were victims of a serial killer, human trafficking, or something even more sinister? Your theories always help me see these cases from different angles. Sarah Elizabeth Williams was 17 years old, and everything you'd expect from a future world leader. At 5 feet 6 inches with flowing blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, Sarah wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant. Valedictorian of her class, captain of the debate team, president of the Honor Society, and early acceptance to Harvard University with a full academic scholarship. But Sarah's ambition wasn't born from privilege. When she was 12, her father died in a car accident on Route 34, the same road where she would disappear 5 years later. Her mother, Margaret, worked 2 jobs just to keep their small house on Maple Street. Sarah worked at the local library every weekend since she was 14, saving every penny for college expenses her scholarship wouldn't cover. The night before prom, Sarah made a promise to her mother that would haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. She said, and I quote from Margaret's police statement, "After tomorrow night, Mom, everything changes. We're going to have a better life. I promise you that." Margaret would replay those words in her mind every single day for the next 32 years. But here's what makes Sarah's story even more tragic. Hidden in her bedroom was a detailed life plan she had written out in a journal. College at Harvard, law school at Yale, a career in politics that would take her to Washington, D.C., and eventually a run for President of the United States. Sarah had mapped out her entire future in meticulous detail, right down to the legislation she wanted to sponsor as a congresswoman. Miguel Rodriguez, who everyone called Mike, was 18 and the undisputed star of Millbrook High. At 6 feet 1 inch with dark hair and the kind of smile that made him impossible not to like. Mike was the running back who had broken every rushing record in the school's history. College scouts from Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State had been fighting over him since his sophomore year. But Mike's success on the football field was just part of his incredible story. Living in a cramped apartment above Garcia's grocery store with his parents and 3 younger siblings, Mike understood the value of hard work better than most adults. His father, Carlos, pulled double shifts at the steel mill, while his mother, Maria, cleaned houses during the day and took in sewing at night just to make ends meet. Mike maintained a 3.7 GPA while working part-time at his uncle's auto repair shop. Every Friday night after football games, instead of partying with his teammates, Mike could be found at the community center tutoring younger kids in mathematics. His teammates often joked that Mike was more serious about his studies than some of the honor students. 2 weeks before prom, Mike had made the biggest decision of his young life. He chose Penn State over Ohio State, specifically because their pre-law program would put him closer to his girlfriend Sarah's future at Harvard. Mike had dreams of becoming a lawyer himself, fighting for working-class families like his own. Hidden in Mike's bedroom was a modest but beautiful engagement ring that had cost him 6 months of wages from the auto shop. He planned to propose to Sarah after graduation, and he had already asked her father's permission posthumously by visiting his grave the week before prom. That ring would later become crucial evidence in the investigation, but not in the way anyone expected. Jessica Marie Chen was 17 and seemed to carry the weight of the world on her artistic shoulders. Born in Taiwan and adopted by the Chens when she was 3, Jessica had always felt like she was watching life from the outside, looking in. Her adoptive parents, both professors at the local community college, loved her deeply but never quite understood the darkness that seemed to follow their daughter's extraordinary artistic talent. Jessica's bedroom was a chaos of canvases, sketchbooks, and paint-stained clothes scattered everywhere. Her artwork was haunting, portraits that seemed to capture not just faces but souls. The high school art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, often said Jessica had more natural talent than most professional artists she knew. Jessica had been accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design, but the financial burden seemed impossible for her family to bear. What nobody knew was that Jessica had been documenting everything in detailed journals for years: poetry, thoughts about identity and belonging, and most importantly, observations about the people around her. Jessica noticed things that others missed: patterns in behavior, changes in mood, subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Those journals would disappear along with Jessica, but investigators would later wonder if she had seen something, noticed something, that put her and her friends in danger. In one entry from 2 weeks before prom, Jessica wrote something that would later send chills down investigators' spines. "There's something different about Officer Mitchell lately. He's been asking too many questions about our plans, about where we go, about when we'll be alone." The night before prom, Jessica wrote something in her journal that investigators would read years later with a sense of profound sadness. She wrote, "Tomorrow night feels like an ending and a beginning. I hope wherever life takes me. I remember how it felt to be 17 and full of possibilities, but something feels different about tomorrow. I can't explain it, but it's like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen." David Michael Thompson was 18, a tall, lanky musician with unruly brown curls and fingers that seemed to always be moving, as if playing an invisible guitar. Music wasn't just David's passion. It was his language, his way of making sense of a world that often seemed too loud, too fast, too complicated for his sensitive soul. David had taught himself to play guitar at age 10, with a battered acoustic instrument he found at a garage sale. By senior year, he could play any song after hearing it once, and his original compositions were sophisticated enough to earn him acceptance to Berklee College of Music in Boston. But like many of his friends, the financial reality of his dreams seemed overwhelming. David's parents owned the town's only accounting firm and wanted their son to study business, take over the family practice, and live the safe, predictable life they had built over 30 years. But David's heart belonged to music. He worked part-time at Miller's Music Store, dreaming of Nashville or Los Angeles, writing songs about small-town life and big-city dreams. 3 days before prom, David completed a song called Millbrook Nights, about growing up in a place where everybody knows your name but nobody understands your dreams. He planned to perform it at the senior talent show the week after prom. That performance would never happen, and the song would be lost forever along with its creator. But here's something that makes David's story particularly heartbreaking. The owner of Miller's Music Store, Jerry Miller, later told investigators that David had been saving money for months to buy a professional quality guitar. David was exactly $47 short of his goal when he disappeared. Jerry had promised to hold the guitar for him until graduation. That guitar remained in the store for 15 years before Jerry finally donated it to the school's music program. Emily Rose Foster was 17, a petite redhead with emerald green eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. As the star of every school play since freshman year, Emily had the kind of natural charisma that made her impossible to ignore. But her bright exterior hid a profound sadness that most people never saw. Emily lived with her grandmother Rose after her parents died in a house fire when she was 14. Rose, a retired English teacher, had raised Emily with love, wisdom, and an appreciation for literature and theater that would shape Emily's dreams of Broadway stardom. She had been accepted to Northwestern University's prestigious theater program and seemed destined for the bright lights of the stage. But Emily carried a secret burden that was tearing her apart inside. Her grandmother was showing early signs of dementia, becoming more confused and forgetful with each passing month. Emily worked weekends at the local movie theater, not just to save money for college, but to practice different characters and accents while watching every film that came through town. The conflict between her dreams and her sense of responsibility kept Emily awake many nights. She had also been accepted to Ohio State's education program and was seriously considering staying close to home to care for her grandmother. She confided this internal struggle only to David Thompson, who understood the pull between passion and practicality. What makes Emily's story even more tragic is that she had written a letter to her future self to be opened on her 30th birthday. In it, she wrote about her dreams of seeing her name in lights on Broadway, of making her grandmother proud, and of never forgetting where she came from. That letter was found in her bedroom after she disappeared and remains unopened to this day. Ryan James Mitchell was 18, a quiet young man with dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and one of the most brilliant minds anyone in Millbrook had ever encountered. With an IQ of 165, Ryan could solve complex mathematical equations in his head and had already completed college-level coursework through independent study programs. Ryan lived with his single mother, Linda, a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital. His father had abandoned the family when Ryan was 5, unable to handle the challenges of raising a gifted child with mild autism. While social situations were often overwhelming for Ryan, his condition gave him an incredible ability to focus and see patterns that others missed completely. Numbers were Ryan's friends, equations his playground. He had been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship to double major in mathematics and computer science. Despite his social challenges, Ryan had found his place among the 7 friends. They protected him from bullies, included him in their plans, and valued his unique perspective on everything from homework to relationships. 2 weeks before prom, Ryan had created a complex mathematical model predicting the future success rates of his 6 closest friends. Using variables like academic performance, family support, financial resources, and personal motivation, Ryan calculated that they all had a 95% probability of achieving their dreams and living fulfilling lives. Ryan's mathematical models were usually frighteningly accurate. This time, they would prove to be tragically wrong. But Ryan had also been working on another project that investigators would later find deeply unsettling. He had been using his mathematical skills to analyze crime patterns in their area, tracking incidents of theft, vandalism, and more serious crimes over a 5-year period. Ryan's analysis had identified several anomalies that suggested some crimes were being underreported or misclassified by local law enforcement. Amanda Nicole Brooks was 17, a thoughtful young woman with shoulder-length brown hair and eyes that seemed to capture every detail of the world around her. As editor of the school newspaper and official yearbook photographer, Amanda was the unofficial chronicler of her generation, documenting every important moment of their shared high school experience. Amanda came from Millbrook's wealthiest family. Her father owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties, and her mother was active in every social organization in town. They lived in a sprawling house on Hill Street, where Amanda had never wanted for anything material. But all the money in the world couldn't buy what Amanda craved most: authenticity. She felt trapped by her family's expectations and the superficial social circles her mother constantly pushed her toward. Through her camera lens, Amanda sought truth, real moments, genuine emotion. Her photography was extraordinary, capturing candid shots that revealed character and story without the need for words. Amanda had been accepted to Columbia University's journalism program and dreamed of becoming a photojournalist, traveling the world to document important stories that needed to be told, but her parents had different plans. They wanted her to attend a local college, marry someone from a good family, and settle into the comfortable upper-class life they had worked so hard to build. 3 days before prom, Amanda had started a photography project she called The Last Days of Childhood. She planned to document their final weeks of high school, creating a visual narrative of the transition from adolescence to adulthood. What she was actually documenting were the last days of their lives. But Amanda's photography project would later provide investigators with crucial evidence. In the weeks before prom, Amanda had unknowingly captured several photographs that showed suspicious activity around the school and in their neighborhood. Cars that didn't belong, people who seemed to be watching them, patterns of surveillance that nobody noticed at the time. Now here's what you need to understand about these 7 teenagers, and this is crucial to understanding why their disappearance was so shocking to everyone who knew them. They weren't just friends, they were family. Bonded by shared dreams, mutual respect, and the kind of deep loyalty that only comes from growing up together in a small town where everyone knows your business. They protected each other, supported each other's ambitions, and planned to stay connected no matter where their futures took them. Sarah and Mike were planning to attend colleges on the East Coast. Jessica and David were both heading to prestigious arts programs. Emily was torn between Northwestern and staying home. Ryan was excited about MIT. Amanda was fighting for her journalism dreams. And that's what makes their disappearance so particularly haunting and suspicious. Because these weren't troubled kids looking for a way out. These weren't rebellious teenagers running away from home. These were 7 of the brightest, most promising young people Millbrook had ever produced, with everything to live for and every reason to come home safely that night. But before I tell you what happened on prom night, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a feeling that something was wrong, even when everything seemed normal? That's what several people in Millbrook reported feeling in the weeks leading up to prom. A sense that something was off, that they were being watched, that danger was lurking just beneath the surface of their peaceful small town. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm, and lets me know you want to see more content like this. And definitely subscribe if you haven't already, because I have more shocking cold cases coming up that you won't want to miss. Let me tell you about May 15th, 1992, the night that changed everything forever. The weather that day was absolutely perfect. 72 degrees with clear skies and a gentle breeze that made the spring air feel like a promise of good things to come. The prom theme was Starry Night, inspired by Van Gogh's famous painting, and the decoration committee had transformed the Millbrook High Gymnasium into something magical. Deep blue fabric draped from the ceiling, dotted with hundreds of silver stars that caught the light from the disco ball in the center of the room. Twinkling white lights were strung along the walls, and each table was decorated with blue and silver centerpieces that looked like miniature galaxies. It was the kind of setup that made even the most cynical teenager believe in fairy tales. Sarah had spent months saving for her emerald green gown, working extra hours at the library, and babysitting for neighbors whenever possible. The dress was perfect for her, bringing out the color of her eyes and making her look every inch the future world leader she was destined to become. Her mother, Margaret, had surprised her that morning by taking her to the salon for professional hair and makeup, a luxury the Williams family could barely afford. As Margaret helped Sarah with her jewelry that evening, she gave her daughter the necklace that Sarah's father had given her on their wedding day. It was the only expensive piece of jewelry the family owned, and Margaret wanted Sarah to wear something special from both of her parents. "You look like a princess," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face as she realized her little girl was about to start the next chapter of her life. Mike had rented his tuxedo from Henderson's Formal Wear 2 towns over, the only shop within 50 miles that carried his size. The cost had taken a significant chunk of his savings, but Mike wanted everything to be perfect for Sarah. His entire family gathered in their cramped living room above the grocery store to take pictures, his younger siblings dancing around him with excitement while his parents beamed with pride. Mike's mother, Maria, had pressed his white shirt 3 times that morning, wanting every detail to be flawless for her eldest son's special night. His father, Carlos, who rarely showed emotion, actually teared up when he saw Mike in his tuxedo. "You look like a man," Carlos said in Spanish, embracing his son. "Make us proud tonight, and remember that we love you no matter what the future brings." Jessica had spent weeks designing and creating her own dress, a simple but elegant black gown that reflected her artistic sensibilities. She had sewn it by hand in her bedroom, working late into the night to get every detail perfect. Her adoptive parents had surprised her with pearl earrings that had belonged to her adoptive father's grandmother, making Jessica feel truly connected to the Chen family legacy for the first time in years. David had borrowed his father's suit from the early 1980s, having it altered to fit his taller, thinner frame. But what made him shine that night wasn't his clothes. It was the guitar pick necklace Jessica had made for him, incorporating a pick from his very first guitar into a silver pendant. It was the most meaningful gift he had ever received, and he wore it with more pride than any expensive jewelry could have provided. Emily's preparation had been the most emotional of all. Her grandmother Rose had surprised her by pulling a dress from the attic, a beautiful navy blue gown that Rose had worn to her own prom in 1954. After some minor alterations, it fit Emily perfectly, creating a beautiful connection between generations that brought both women to tears. "You're going to do amazing things," Rose whispered as she helped Emily with her makeup. "I can feel it in my bones." Ryan's preparation had been the most challenging due to his sensory sensitivities. The formal clothes felt uncomfortable against his skin, and the social aspects of prom filled him with anxiety. But his mother Linda, working closely with Sarah Williams, had found a comfortable tuxedo and spent weeks practicing social interactions with Ryan to help him feel confident. By prom night, Ryan was actually excited to celebrate with his friends. Amanda wore a designer gown that her mother had ordered from New York City, a creation that cost more than most families in Millbrook spent on groceries in 3 months. But Amanda barely cared about the dress. She was much more interested in the professional camera equipment she had borrowed from the school's journalism department to document the evening for her last days of childhood project. The prom officially began at 7 p.m. in the decorated gymnasium. Principal Johnson and the volunteer decoration committee had truly outdone themselves. Even the most jaded seniors had to admit that the transformation was incredible. The professional photographer hired for the event would later tell police that in 20 years of shooting proms, he had never seen a happier, more excited group of students. Sarah and Mike arrived together in Mike's uncle's borrowed car, a pristine 1987 Camaro that had been washed and detailed for the occasion. They made a stunning couple, and when they walked into the gymnasium hand in hand, conversations actually stopped. Amanda was there to capture the moment with her camera, taking what would become some of the last photographs ever taken of the group alive. Jessica arrived with David, though they were attending as friends rather than a romantic couple. Both were too focused on their artistic pursuits to complicate things with romance, but they enjoyed each other's company and shared a deep intellectual connection that their classmates often envied. Emily came with a date from the neighboring town, a boy she had met during a regional theater competition, but she spent most of the evening with her 6 closest friends, the people who truly understood and supported her dreams of stardom. Ryan attended with Sarah's cousin, visiting from Columbus, an arrangement Sarah had carefully orchestrated to ensure Ryan would feel comfortable and included in the festivities. It was typical of Sarah's thoughtfulness that she had spent weeks planning how to make sure Ryan had a good time. The evening unfolded like something from a movie. The DJ played all the hits from 1992. Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You, Boyz II Men's End of the Road, and Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. The dance floor was packed, the energy was electric, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. But what made the night truly special were the small moments that the professional photographer and Amanda's camera captured. Sarah and Mike slow dancing during November rain, completely lost in each other's eyes. Jessica sketching other couples in a small notebook she always carried, her artistic eye capturing the romance and excitement around her. David playing acoustic guitar during a quiet moment, his fingers moving across the strings like magic. Emily dancing with multiple partners, her natural charisma making her the center of attention wherever she went. Ryan surprising everyone by asking 3 different girls to dance and actually enjoying himself in a social situation for the first time anyone could remember. Amanda moving through the crowd like a professional photographer, documenting every important moment of their last night as children. At 10:30 p.m., the official crowning ceremony began. Nobody was surprised when Sarah Williams and Mike Rodriguez were announced as prom queen and king. They had been the obvious choice for months, the perfect couple that everyone looked up to and admired. During their spotlight dance, witnesses said they looked completely and utterly in love, whispering to each other and laughing like they shared secrets no one else could understand. But here's where our story starts to take a dark turn, because what happened next would seal their fate in ways none of them could have imagined. As the official prom began winding down around 11 p.m., the 7 friends started making plans for what would come next. Sarah suggested they all go to her family's cabin by Miller's Lake, about 20 minutes outside of town. The cabin had been in the Williams family for 3 generations, a simple 2-bedroom structure on 5 acres of wooded land that fronted the lake. Margaret had given permission for the group to spend the night there, with strict instructions about no drinking, no drugs, and a promise to call when they arrived safely. The plan seemed perfect and completely innocent. Drive out to the cabin in Sarah's red Ford Explorer, spend the night talking about their dreams and futures, watch the sunrise over the lake, and create one last perfect memory before graduation scattered them across the country. But what none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly suspected, was that their destination had been under surveillance for months. Unknown to the Williams family, to Sarah, or to any of the 7 friends, the cabin by Miller's Lake was already part of a much larger and more sinister operation. At 11:25 p.m., the 7 friends left Millbrook High School together for the last time. Amanda took a final group photo of them standing beside Sarah's SUV in the school parking lot, all of them laughing and looking impossibly young and hopeful. That photograph would later become one of the most haunting images in the entire investigation. But if you look carefully at that photograph, and investigators have analyzed every pixel thousands of times, you can see something in the background that none of them noticed that night. A dark sedan with tinted windows parked across the street from the school, partially hidden behind a delivery truck. The occupants of that sedan had been watching the 7 friends all evening. They stopped at Gibson's Gas Stop Market at 11:30 p.m., a routine stop that would become crucial to the timeline investigators would later construct. The security camera footage from that night shows all 7 teenagers piling out of Sarah's Explorer, laughing and joking like they didn't have a care in the world. Sarah bought a bag of chips and some sodas for the group. Mike filled up the gas tank with money he had been saving for weeks. Amanda took pictures of everyone crowded around the car, continuing her documentation project even during this mundane stop. The clerk on duty, Tommy Morrison, would later tell police that they seemed completely normal, happy and excited about their night ahead. Tommy Morrison was working his usual weekend shift that night, and he knew all 7 of the teenagers by name. Millbrook was the kind of town where the gas station clerk had watched these kids grow up, had sold them candy and soda since they were in elementary school. He told investigators that nothing seemed unusual about their behavior, their mood, or their plans. But here's what's truly chilling about that security camera footage, and this detail would later become crucial to solving the case 32 years later. If you watch it carefully, and investigators have analyzed every frame thousands of times, you can see something that none of them noticed that night. In the background of the footage, partially obscured by the gas pump, there's another vehicle, a dark sedan with tinted windows that had been following them from the school. The license plate is partially visible in one frame, and when investigators finally ran those numbers in 2024, they would discover something that would blow this case wide open. The occupants of that sedan had been watching the 7 friends all evening. They knew about the cabin, they knew about the isolated location, and they were about to put into motion a plan that had been months in the making. That security camera footage would be the last confirmed sighting of the Millbrook 7 alive. What happened next has remained a mystery for over 30 years, but based on witness statements, physical evidence, and the shocking discoveries made in 2024, investigators now believe they can piece together at least part of what occurred during those final, terrifying hours. The 7 friends left Gibson's gas stop at approximately 11:45 p.m., heading north on Route 34 toward Miller's Lake. Sarah's red Explorer was seen by 2 different witnesses making that journey, and both sightings would later become crucial pieces of the puzzle that investigators struggled to solve for decades. The first witness was Dale Hendricks, a local farmer who was returning home from dealing with a veterinary emergency involving his cattle. Dale's farm sat about halfway between Millbrook and Miller's Lake, and his driveway provided a clear view of Route 34. At approximately midnight, Dale saw Sarah's distinctive red SUV pass his property, traveling at normal speed toward the lake. Dale knew the vehicle well, because he had sold Sarah's family the hay they used to heat their house during the winter months. He actually waved at the passing car, though he later told police he couldn't see through the tinted windows to know if anyone waved back. At the time, Dale thought nothing of the sighting. Teenagers often went to Miller's Lake to hang out, especially after big events like prom, but the second witness report was far more troubling and would haunt investigators for years to come. Janet Walsh was a night shift nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, driving home after working a double shift that had lasted until midnight. Janet knew Route 34 like the back of her hand, having driven it twice daily for 15 years. At approximately 12:15 a.m., Janet spotted Sarah's red Explorer pulled over on the side of Route 34, about 5 miles from Miller's Lake. The vehicle's hazard lights were flashing, and Janet immediately slowed down to see if she could help. She was less than 100 feet away when the hazard lights suddenly turned off, and the SUV pulled back onto the road. Janet followed at a distance for about 2 miles, concerned about the young people in the vehicle. But something about the situation felt wrong to her. Though she couldn't articulate exactly what, the Explorer seemed to be driving more slowly than normal, and Janet thought she could see more than one person in the front seat, which struck her as odd, since Sarah usually drove alone, or with just Mike in the passenger seat. When Janet reached her turnoff toward her home, she made a decision that would torment her for the rest of her life. Instead of continuing to follow the SUV, or stopping to check on its occupants, she went home. She was exhausted from her double shift, and assumed the teenagers were just having car trouble that they had managed to resolve. Janet would later tell investigators that she replayed that moment in her mind thousands of times over the years, wondering what might have been different if she had made a different choice. After that sighting at 12:30 a.m., Sarah's Explorer vanished completely from the face of the earth. By 1:15 a.m., the parents were starting to worry. Sarah had promised to call her mother when they arrived safely at the cabin, but Margaret's phone remained silent. Mike's parents expected him home by midnight, despite giving permission for the after-party, because he had promised to help with his younger siblings the next morning. Margaret Williams was the first to panic. She tried calling the cabin's landline repeatedly, but there was no answer. The phone just rang, and rang in the empty building by the lake. By 2 a.m., Margaret was calling the other parents, trying to determine if anyone had heard from their children. Within an hour, all 7 families were in contact with each other, sharing phone numbers and coordinating their growing concern. These weren't the type of teenagers who stayed out all night without calling. They weren't rebels or troublemakers. They were responsible young people who respected their parents and followed the rules. Margaret Williams called the Millbrook Police Department at 3 a.m. to report 7 missing teenagers. But here's where our story encounters its first major red flag, a detail that would later prove to be far more significant than anyone realized at the time. When Margaret called the police station that night, she was told by the desk sergeant that they couldn't file a missing persons report until the teenagers had been gone for 24 hours. The officer on duty, Sergeant Bradley Collins, later claimed he assumed it was just a case of young people losing track of time and staying out later than planned. But Margaret Williams wasn't some hysterical parent calling about a missed curfew. She explained that her daughter had never missed a curfew in her life, that all 7 families were frantically searching, and that something was clearly wrong. Sergeant Collins, to his credit, agreed to send a patrol car out to Miller's Lake to check the cabin. The officer dispatched to investigate was Thomas Mitchell, a 10-year veteran of the Millbrook Police Department who lived just 15 minutes from the lake. Officer Mitchell would later file a report stating that he arrived at the Williams family cabin at 4:15 a.m. and found it completely empty and secure. According to Mitchell's report, there were no signs that anyone had been at the cabin recently. The doors were locked, the windows were intact, and there were no tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Mitchell radioed back to headquarters that the cabin was clear and that the missing teenagers had probably just changed their plans without informing their parents. But here's what makes Officer Mitchell's report so significant and why it would later become central to the shocking discoveries made in 2024. Mitchell claimed he conducted a thorough search of the cabin and the surrounding property, but he never mentioned finding anything unusual or suspicious. His report was filed as a routine welfare check with negative results. What Mitchell didn't report, what he couldn't have known would later be discovered, was that the cabin had been under surveillance for months. Unknown to the Williams family, to Sarah, or to any of the 7 friends, their chosen destination that night was already part of a much larger and more sinister operation. By 6 a.m. on May 16, 1992, when the 7 teenagers still hadn't returned home and still hadn't called their families, Margaret Williams made the decision that would officially launch one of Ohio's longest-running missing persons investigations. She called the police station again, demanded to speak with the chief, and insisted on filing official missing persons reports for all 7 teenagers. Chief Robert Harrison had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 25 years and had never dealt with anything more serious than the occasional bar fight or domestic dispute. The disappearance of 7 prominent high school students was completely outside his experience, but he recognized the gravity of the situation immediately. By 10 a.m. on Saturday, May 16th, Chief Harrison had contacted the Ohio State Police and requested assistance with what he was now treating as a potential abduction case. The parents had organized their own search parties, and volunteers were already combing every road between Millbrook and Miller's Lake, looking for any sign of the 7 teenagers or Sarah's red Ford Explorer. The search continued throughout the weekend, with no results. No one had seen the vehicle. No gas stations had security footage of them stopping anywhere else. No witnesses had spotted them at any other location. It was as if 7 people and a large SUV had simply vanished into thin air, somewhere on a well-traveled road in rural Ohio. By Monday morning, the story had reached the regional news outlets. Channel 8's morning anchor Patricia Morrison ran a segment about the missing Millbrook students, showing their prom photos and asking anyone with information to contact police. The story resonated with viewers across central Ohio, and the police station was immediately flooded with tips and potential sightings. But every single lead led absolutely nowhere. A gas station attendant in Columbus thought he had seen the group, but his security cameras showed different teenagers entirely. A waitress at a truck stop swore Sarah had bought coffee there at 2 a.m., but she later admitted she had seen the news story first and wasn't certain of her memory. A state trooper reported a red SUV broken down on Interstate 71, but it turned out to be a completely different vehicle with completely different occupants. As the investigation intensified, something strange began to happen. Witnesses who had initially come forward with information started changing their stories. People who had reported seeing suspicious activity around the time of the disappearance suddenly claimed they had been mistaken. It was as if someone was working very hard to make sure certain information never reached the investigators, and that someone was working from inside the police department itself. The investigation intensified dramatically when the FBI was called in on day 5, treating the case as a potential interstate kidnapping. Special Agent Jennifer Murphy, a 20-year veteran with experience in missing persons and child abduction cases, took charge of the investigation and immediately ordered a comprehensive search of the entire area around Miller's Lake. What they found would deepen the mystery even further and provide the first real piece of physical evidence in the case. On day 8 of the search, investigators discovered one of Sarah's pearl earrings embedded in the dirt shoulder of Route 34, approximately 3 miles from where Janet Walsh had reported seeing the Explorer with its hazard lights flashing. But here's what made this discovery so puzzling and significant. Sarah had been wearing both pearl earrings when she left the prom. Multiple photographs from the dance clearly showed both earrings in place. If she had lost one while getting into or out of the car, it would have been found in the school parking lot or at Gibson's gas stop. Finding it miles away on a dark stretch of highway strongly suggested that something had forced the group to stop their vehicle in that location. This was the spot. This was where 7 innocent teenagers met their fate, and the person who knew exactly what happened there was the same person who was supposed to be helping find them. The FBI brought in every resource available in 1992. Cadaver dogs searched mile after mile of wooded area around the lake. Ground-penetrating radar was used to check for recently disturbed earth that might indicate burial sites. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment flew grid patterns over hundreds of square miles of forest and farmland. They searched every building, every abandoned structure, every cave, quarry, and sinkhole within a 50-mile radius of Miller's Lake. Divers explored the lake itself, looking for any sign that the SUV might have accidentally driven into the water. Local airports were contacted to determine if any private planes had taken off that night. Border crossings were alerted in case this was an international trafficking situation. But after 3 weeks of intensive searching involving hundreds of law enforcement officers, federal agents, and civilian volunteers, they had found exactly one pearl earring and a whole lot of questions with no answers. The media attention was intense and relentless. National news programs picked up the story of the 7 missing honor students, and Millbrook found itself at the center of a media circus that completely overwhelmed the small town's infrastructure. Reporters camped out at the police station, interviewed family members, and speculated endlessly about what might have happened to the Millbrook 7, and that's when the theories started emerging. Each one more disturbing than the last, and each one ultimately leading investigators down rabbit holes that wasted precious time and resources, while the real truth remained hidden. The first major theory focused on the possibility of a serial killer operating in the area. In 1992, there was a killer nicknamed the Highway Killer, who had been linked to the disappearances of young people across 3 states. The killer targeted teenagers and young adults who were traveling on rural highways, often after social events like parties or dances. FBI profilers spent weeks analyzing the Millbrook case to determine if it fit the Highway Killer's pattern. The profile seemed to match in several key ways: young victims, isolated location, disappearance from a vehicle, and the complete absence of physical evidence. But there were also significant differences that made investigators question whether they were dealing with the same perpetrator. The Highway Killer typically targeted individuals or couples, not large groups. He usually left some evidence of violence at the abduction site, and his victims were often found within days or weeks, not disappeared entirely. After months of investigation, the FBI officially ruled out the Highway Killer connection, but valuable time and resources had been lost pursuing the theory. The second major theory was even more disturbing. Investigators began exploring the possibility that the 7 teenagers had been targeted by a human trafficking organization. In the early 1990s, law enforcement was just beginning to understand the scope and sophistication of modern trafficking networks, and the complete disappearance of 7 attractive, intelligent young people fit certain patterns that were emerging. The trafficking theory gained credibility when investigators discovered that 3 other groups of young people had disappeared from rural areas across the Midwest over the previous 5 years. In each case, the victims were high-achieving students from good families who vanished without a trace after social events. In each case, the investigations had stalled due to lack of evidence and witnesses. Federal agents spent months investigating possible connections between the cases, looking for common threads that might lead them to a trafficking network. They examined everything, from the victims' online activities, though internet use was limited in 1992, to their families' financial situations, to their academic achievements, trying to understand what might have made them targets. But this theory also ultimately led nowhere. No evidence of trafficking networks operating in rural Ohio was found. No connection to international criminal organizations was established, and no similar cases were solved that might have provided leads in the Millbrook investigation. The third theory was perhaps the most heartbreaking for the families involved. Some investigators began to consider the possibility that the 7 teenagers had chosen to disappear, that they had planned their own vanishing as some kind of elaborate escape from their small-town lives. This theory gained some traction when investigators discovered that several of the 7 had been struggling with the pressure of their academic achievements and the weight of their families' expectations. Jessica's journals revealed her ongoing battle with depression and anxiety. Emily had been conflicted about leaving her grandmother. Ryan had been terrified about starting college and leaving his comfort zone. Proponents of this theory suggested that the 7 friends had made a pact to start new lives somewhere else, that they had saved money, obtained false identification, and carefully planned their disappearance to look like an abduction. They pointed to the fact that no bodies had been found, no evidence of violence had been discovered, and no ransom demands had been made. But this theory had massive flaws that the families immediately identified. These teenagers had no access to the kind of resources required for creating new identities. They had no connections to help them establish new lives in other locations. Most importantly, they loved their families deeply and would never have put them through the agony of not knowing what had happened. Margaret Williams became particularly vocal in debunking this theory. She pointed out that Sarah's engagement ring from Mike was still in his bedroom, that Sarah's college scholarship paperwork was still on her desk, and that Sarah had been planning her future in meticulous detail right up until the night she disappeared. "My daughter didn't run away," Margaret told reporters. "Someone took her. Someone took all of them." As months turned into years with no breaks in the case, the investigation began to slow down. The FBI task force was reassigned to other cases, the media attention moved on to other stories, and the families of the Millbrook Seven were left to cope with a nightmare that seemed to have no end. But the families never gave up hope. Margaret Williams became a tireless advocate for missing persons cases, working with other families across the country who were dealing with similar tragedies. She organized annual memorial services, kept the story alive in local media, and never stopped believing that someday, somehow, she would learn the truth about what happened to her daughter. The Rodriguez family struggled financially after losing Mike, their main hope for breaking the cycle of poverty. Carlos Rodriguez had to take a third job to make ends meet, while Maria fell into a deep depression that lasted for years. Mike's younger siblings grew up in the shadow of their missing brother, always wondering if he would walk through the door someday. Jessica's adoptive parents, the Chens, threw themselves into art therapy programs, believing that creativity could help other troubled young people the way it had helped their daughter. They donated Jessica's artwork to the school and established a scholarship in her name for students pursuing artistic careers. David's parents eventually closed their accounting firm, unable to concentrate on business while their son remained missing. They moved to Florida, hoping that a change of scenery might help them heal, but the pain followed them wherever they went. Emily's grandmother, Rose, lived for 10 more years, always setting an extra place at the dinner table and leaving the porch light on in case Emily came home. When Rose passed away in 2002, she was still asking nurses if there was any news about her granddaughter. Ryan's mother, Linda, continued working as a nurse, but became obsessed with reading about autism and gifted children, convinced that somehow Ryan's condition had made him more vulnerable to whatever had happened that night. She joined support groups for families of missing persons and became an advocate for better police procedures in missing persons cases. Amanda's parents dealt with their grief by throwing money at the investigation. They hired private detectives, offered increased rewards, and funded searches that the police could no longer afford. But despite spending hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, they never found a single credible lead. By 2000, the case had officially gone cold. The original investigators had retired or moved on to other departments. The evidence boxes sat in storage, gathering dust. And the 7 families had resigned themselves to the possibility that they might never know what happened to their children. But cold cases have a way of heating up again when you least expect it. And in the early 2000s, new technology began to offer hope that old mysteries might finally be solved. DNA analysis had advanced significantly since 1992. The internet made it possible to share information across vast distances instantly. Digital databases allowed investigators to cross-reference cases from different jurisdictions. And most importantly, a new generation of investigators was looking at old cases with fresh eyes and new techniques. In 2010, the Millbrook 7 case was officially reopened as part of a statewide cold case initiative. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Jessica but inspired by her story, was assigned to review all the evidence and interview anyone who might have new information. Detective Chen spent 2 years going through every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every theory that had been proposed over the previous 18 years. She used new computer software to analyze the timeline, create geographic profiles of the area, and identify patterns that earlier investigators might have missed. One of the things Detective Chen discovered was troubling. Several key pieces of evidence from the original investigation had gone missing over the years. Files had been misfiled, photographs had disappeared, and some witness statements had been altered or removed entirely from the case records. Detective Chen also noticed something strange about Officer Thomas Mitchell's involvement in the case. Mitchell had been the first officer to respond to the scene at Miller's Lake, but he had also been present at several other crucial moments in the investigation. He had been the one to interview Tommy Morrison at the gas station. He had been present when Sarah's earring was found, and he had been involved in several witness interviews that had later been deemed unreliable. In 2012, Detective Chen requested a complete audit of the evidence storage facility where the Millbrook 7 materials were kept. What she discovered was shocking. Nearly 40% of the original evidence had either been destroyed, lost, or corrupted over the years. But more disturbing was the pattern of what had gone missing. All of the evidence that had disappeared was related to specific aspects of the investigation. Surveillance footage from businesses along Route 34, witness statements from people who had reported suspicious activity, and most significantly, all of the materials related to Officer Thomas Mitchell's involvement in the case. Detective Chen tried to interview Mitchell about his role in the original investigation, but discovered that he had retired from the Millbrook Police Department in 1995 and moved to Florida. When she finally tracked him down, Mitchell claimed he couldn't remember many details about the case and refused to cooperate with the new investigation. But Detective Chen didn't give up. She spent months tracking down other officers who had worked with Mitchell, interviewing witnesses who had been overlooked in the original investigation, and trying to piece together what might have happened to the missing evidence. What she discovered would change everything, but it would take 12 more years and a construction accident to finally reveal the truth. In March 2024, the Millbrook Police Department decided to renovate their headquarters building. The structure had been built in 1967 and was showing its age. Plumbing problems, electrical issues, and space constraints had made the building increasingly difficult to work in. The renovation was supposed to be routine: update the electrical system, modernize the plumbing, and reconfigure some of the office spaces to be more efficient. But when construction workers began tearing down walls in the basement, they made a discovery that would rewrite the entire history of the Millbrook 7 case. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement storage area, workers found a secret room that didn't appear on any of the building's blueprints. The room was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, accessible only through a hidden door that had been disguised to look like part of the wall. But what was inside that room was even more shocking than its existence. The secret chamber contained boxes and boxes of evidence from the Millbrook 7 investigation. Materials that had been reported lost or destroyed over the years. Photographs that had never been processed. Witness statements that had never been filed. And most damning of all, detailed records of a cover-up that reached the highest levels of the Millbrook Police Department. Among the hidden materials were surveillance photographs showing Officer Thomas Mitchell meeting with unidentified individuals in the weeks before the prom. Financial records indicating that Mitchell had received large cash payments from unknown sources. And most chilling of all, a handwritten note that read, "They found out about the tunnel, had to move them. Mitchell knows where." But the most shocking discovery was a map of Millbrook and the surrounding area, marked with locations that corresponded to an underground tunnel system that no one knew existed. The tunnels connected several buildings in downtown Millbrook, including the police station, the old courthouse, and a warehouse district near the railroad tracks. When investigators examined these tunnels in 2024, they found evidence of a human trafficking operation that had been operating in Millbrook for decades. The tunnels had been used to move people without being detected, and the operation had been protected by corrupt law enforcement officials who had covered up any evidence that might have exposed the network. The investigation that followed was swift and comprehensive. Within weeks, federal authorities had arrested 12 people connected to the trafficking operation, including 2 former Millbrook police officers and a retired county judge. But Thomas Mitchell, the key figure in the cover-up, had died in 2018, taking many of the secrets with him to his grave. The truth about what happened to the Millbrook 7 finally emerged through witness testimony from some of the arrested conspirators. On the night of May 15, 1992, the 7 teenagers had indeed driven to Miller's Lake as planned, but they had been followed by Mitchell and his associates, who had been monitoring the group for weeks. The teenagers had been targeted because Jessica Chen had inadvertently photographed evidence of the trafficking operation during her documentation project. One of her photographs showed vehicles and people at the warehouse district that shouldn't have been there. Another showed Mitchell meeting with known criminals near the school. When the conspirators realized that Jessica might have evidence that could expose their operation, they decided to eliminate the threat. But because Jessica was always with her 6 friends, and because the group was so close-knit, they decided to take all 7 teenagers to prevent anyone from coming forward with questions. The abduction happened on Route 34, at the location where Janet Walsh had seen the Explorer with its hazard lights on. Mitchell had used his police authority to pull the vehicle over, claiming there was a problem with the car. Once the teenagers were out of the vehicle, they were overpowered by Mitchell's associates and taken to the tunnel system beneath Millbrook. The 7 friends were held in the tunnels for several days while the conspirators decided what to do with them. But when it became clear that the disappearance was generating too much attention and that a federal investigation was imminent, the decision was made to eliminate the witnesses permanently. The exact details of what happened next may never be fully known, as most of the conspirators have refused to cooperate with investigators. But based on the evidence found in the tunnels and testimony from the few who have talked, it appears that the 7 teenagers were murdered sometime during the week following their disappearance. Their bodies were never recovered and may have been disposed of in ways that make recovery impossible. Some investigators believe they were cremated in industrial furnaces at the warehouse district. Others think they may have been buried in remote locations that were later developed into housing subdivisions or commercial districts. The revelation of the truth brought some measure of closure to the families, but also opened up new wounds. Margaret Williams, now in her 70s, finally had an answer to the question that had tormented her for 32 years. But learning that her daughter had been murdered by the very people who were supposed to protect her was almost more than she could bear. "At least now I know," Margaret said in a statement to the press. "Sarah didn't suffer for years in captivity. She didn't spend decades wondering why we never found her. She's been at peace all this time, and now maybe the rest of us can find some peace too." The other families had similar reactions. Grief mixed with relief, anger mixed with gratitude for finally knowing the truth. The revelation didn't bring back their children, but it did answer the questions that had consumed their lives for over 3 decades. The case also led to significant changes in how missing persons investigations are conducted in Ohio. New protocols were established for evidence storage and chain of custody. Oversight procedures were implemented to prevent corruption in local law enforcement, and victim advocacy groups were given more resources to help families navigate the investigation process. Today, there is a memorial garden in Millbrook where the 7 friends are remembered. 7 trees were planted in their honor, along with a bench where people can sit and reflect on their young lives and the dreams that were cut short. The inscription on the memorial reads, "In memory of 7 bright stars who were taken too soon, but whose light continues to shine in the hearts of all who knew them." The Millbrook 7 case serves as a reminder that evil can exist in the most unexpected places, that corruption can reach into institutions we trust, and that the search for truth sometimes takes decades to reach its conclusion. But it also demonstrates the power of persistence, the importance of never giving up hope, and the way that new technology and fresh perspectives can finally solve even the most baffling mysteries. The 7 teenagers who walked into their prom on May 15, 1992, never got to live the lives they had planned. Sarah never became president. Mike never played professional football or became a lawyer. Jessica never had her art displayed in major galleries. David never recorded his songs or performed on stage. Emily never saw her name in lights on Broadway. Ryan never changed the world with his mathematical genius. And Amanda never traveled the world documenting important stories. But their story has become important in its own right. Their case led to the exposure of a criminal conspiracy that had operated for decades. Their memory inspired changes in law enforcement procedures that have helped other families find answers. And their legacy continues to remind us that every missing person is someone's child, someone's dreams made flesh, someone whose absence leaves a hole in the world that can never be filled. The Millbrook 7 are finally at rest. And while justice was delayed for 32 years, it was not ultimately denied. The truth, as it always does eventually, finally came to light. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more cold case investigations. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case and whether you believe justice was truly served. And remember, there are still thousands of missing persons cases that remain unsolved. Every one of them represents a family still searching for answers, still hoping for closure, still believing that someday the truth will finally emerge.